Edward Bond's Lear has rich allusions to Shakespeare's masterpiece King Lear. There is no denying to the fact that Bond is highly influenced by the great Elizabethan tragedy, King Lear. Uh, he himself had admitted that he had been haunted by the myth of King Lear before he wrote this play, Lear. Uh, but there are great differences. He deliberately chose to be different from the Elizabethan tragedy. Shakespeare's King Lear was a personal tragedy, whereas Bond's is a political tragedy. Of course, when Shakespeare wrote his play in the Elizabethan period, there is nothing much to choose between personal and political. The king wielded absolute power. The king's family, the royal family, owned the court, and they had been considered as a state institution itself. But Bond, in fact, realized that continuing a fascination for the personal life at the expense of political would devolve his drama into uh, rather absurdity. So he chose to be totally different from the Elizabethan tragedy. In fact, he chose to model himself on Bertolt Brecht and his epic theatre. We will describe a few instances how he changed his play uh, into a Brechtian critique of contemporary culture, how he remodeled Shakespeare's King Lear into a Brechtian critique of the contemporary society. For example, the character of Cordelia. In the original work, Cordelia uh, was a character who fought for the well-being of her father. She forgave all the sins of her father who ill-treated her. She fought the war not for herself but to reinstate him to power. She was rather unmindful of the patriarchal power, or she was rather blind to the political mistakes or political incompetence of her father when she fought the war to reinstate him to power. If such a Cordelia had been presented on the stage by Edward Bond, that would have been nothing short of melodramatic. And more than anyone else, Edward Bond himself understood the necessity to change a few characters according to the times. The modern Cordelia. She is not the daughter of King Lear, of course. She, in fact, uh, was at the receiving end of the cruelty of the rulers. She had been raped by the soldiers, her husband was killed, and she becomes a sort of guerrilla leader, guerrilla leader, I should say, who wanted to reform the society. And finally, she succeeds and becomes herself the ruler. But when she comes to power, she becomes much a changed person, as has happened to almost all the rulers, including the communist leaders all over the world. She becomes rather authoritarian, rather autocratic, and even goes on to believe that the wall is an absolute necessary for the safety of the nation. She doesn't realize that the wall, which work started by King Lear, was rather a mental block between the ruler and the ruled, and commits the same mistake thinking that wall is absolutely necessary for the safety of the nation. And she even blinds Lear because she thinks that Lear could be a possible opponent for her in the future. So Cordelia is totally different one, a far cry from the original Cordelia of King Lear. That is how, in fact, Edward Bond changed the personal tragedy of King Lear into a political tragedy of the country by portraying all such. For the sake of curiosity, the one character which in fact comes nearest to Cordelia, or the original Cordelia in King Lear, is Cordelia's first husband, the gravedigger's boy. He forgives all the sins of Lear. Even after he becomes a ghost, he is with Lear, forgiving all his sins. He shows a lot of compassion to Lear. Okay, that is how Edward Bond, in fact, chose to be different from the original work of Shakespeare.